Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining for all across the world. My name is Marcelo Garcia, Senior Director at Intervistas, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we have the privilege to have a very good, and I would say even stellar panel here to discuss so many of the issues that are underlying the sustainability agenda. First, Suzanne Acton-Gervais, Interim CEO and President of the National Airlines Council of Canada. Welcome, Suzanne.
Good morning. Good morning from Ottawa, Canada. Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Abderrahman Bert is joining us from Nairobi, I believe, Secretary General of the African Airlines Association. Bonjour, Abderrahman.
Good afternoon.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Yeah.
We also have Abdul Wahab Faha. He's joining us from Beirut, Lebanon. He's the Secretary General of the Arab Air Carriers Organization. Welcome, Abdul. We have Rafael Echevarne, Director General Airports Council International for Latin America and the Caribbean. He's joining us from Houston, right, Rafael?
Hello, yes, good morning.
Welcome, welcome. And we have Thomas Reynard, Managing Director of Airlines for Europe. Welcome, Thomas.
Hello, good day, everyone.
Hello. So the purpose of the roundtable today is to offer regional perspectives to the ongoing global debate on sustainability. My intention is a bit to unpack the sustainability concept and highlight some of the regional challenges with you, because I believe as an industry, we need to keep in mind some of those challenges ahead as we move forward for those very ambitious objectives 2050. Our research at Intervistas continues to show that capacity building and regulatory gaps remain within and across regions. And those, I think, might compromise, in some cases, that path towards a more sustainable aviation sector. For example, access to affordable sustainable aviation fuels and a country's ability to revamp aviation infrastructure could well define the gap between the haves and the have-nots. As we all know, burdensome or politicized regulatory frameworks are very costly for the industry, but also for travelers. In markets such as Latin America and Africa, intra-regional connectivity and market liberalization remain a concern. Other concerns voiced by some of you during our preparatory calls to this session, gaps in terms of skills and training between developed and developing countries, but also a potential loss of air connectivity for small regional markets. In parallel, we've seen recently that geopolitics can endanger the safety of aircraft and passengers and turn aviation into a tool of coercive diplomacy. So could geopolitics be another unforeseen obstacle to the global agenda for sustainability? And last but not least, in terms of pandemic crisis management, what should be the industry's game plan to avoid what we've seen in the past 24 months, and so we can build more resilience? We'll start our discussion with Rafael Echevarne. He represents the Latin America. He will speak to Latin American Caribbean issues. But Rafael was also involved with ACI World before as chief economist. So, Rafael, you have both the global and the regional view. Perhaps could you tell a few words on, what are the lessons learned from your region in terms of responses to pandemics, but also what does it mean, sustainability, for some of your members?
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. Indeed, sustainability is a very hot topic, as you all know, and in some places it may mean something, in others another things. The good thing about the pandemic and sustainability is that despite the fact that we've actually gone through the worst crisis the industry has ever seen, the focus on sustainability and in particular environmental sustainability has not wind down. I mean, on the contrary, people are more and more interested in ensuring the sustainable environment, a sustainable environment. So that's a very good, very positive thing. I mean, we have members, our airport members, who have actually joined our program called Airport Carbon Accreditation. So during this very difficult time. Now, in terms of the recovery of traffic, because everybody is asking that, things in Latin America are going better than we thought. We actually closed 2021 with 40% below the 2019 levels. That is the second region in the world in terms of recovery. The most advanced recovery is happening in North America. As you know, they closed at 37% below. Actually, as I say, in Latin America, 40% below. December was 18% below. So we're actually catching up faster in terms of traffic recovery. Of course, there have been different speeds, some countries faster than others. Mexico is, as far as we know, the only country in the world that never imposed any kinds of restrictions. And that means that right now they are already at 2019 levels. And some airports actually closed December and January at way above the equivalent months in 2019. Going back to sustainability. So yes, environmental sustainability, very hot topic. People are doing lots of things. It's on the agenda. Social sustainability, because that's another of the legs on which sustainability rests. Very important also in Latin America. Airports are doing very exciting things. Quito Airport, for example, has a very exciting program to work with the community around the airport. But then there is another leg, which is economic sustainability. And you mentioned the word liberalization. That is work in progress. And I wouldn't say even work in progress. That is work that needs to be done in Latin America. I mean, if the pandemic has taught us something, it is that, we should be able to go to other airlines in other parts of the world to actually, provide the services that for whatever reasons have been given up or canceled. If we only had a situation in Latin America as the one that is enjoyed in Europe, where any carrier from any country can fly anywhere, even within other countries, that would have been fantastic, and it would be fantastic for the economies of Latin America. So I'll leave it there for the time being.
Thank you, Rafael, for that review. I'm going to turn it now to Abderrahman. Abderrahman, I know Africa is challenged on many fronts. In terms of sustainability, but also recovery. I mean, vaccination levels are one of the lowest in the world, and I think it'd be great if you can tell our audience and our panel, if we can use some of that for the future discussion. What would you think are the top 3 challenges that Africa is facing in terms of joining that path or participating to that path towards sustainability?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. In terms of pandemic management, the challenge for us today is harmonization across the African continent. I mean, harmonization of health screening protocols. We have 54 states, and we have many different protocols, and this is very confusing for passengers, and even for myself when I'm traveling. I was coming back yesterday from Dakar to Nairobi. I forgot that I need to have a QR code to come back to Nairobi. So at the boarding, they remind me, and I had to issue online the QR code. And the other issue is really regarding the level of vaccination. As you said, in Africa, we have around 10% vaccination rate, and some African states are requiring vaccination for international travelers. This is a challenge because in some states, even people have not access to vaccination. There is also something about digitalization. We have seen in some countries some fake certificates, and which is penalizing airlines when the passengers on arrival is denied entry. We really need, in terms of the pandemic, to learn lessons from what we have seen since 2 years. And for the outlook of the industry, we have seen that we are still very low in terms of activity, capacity, if you compare to the levels before the pandemic. However, we think that 2022 will be a turning year. We think that it will be the year of research. And for intra-African connectivity, we have reached 76% of the pre-COVID level in January. There are since many things to do. And also we have seen African Airlines losing 8.6 billion revenues in 2021. The restart is better on domestic and regional international routes because there are less restrictions on domestic routes, of course. We have many challenges ahead. As I said, the harmonization and also sustainability. Economic sustainability, I mean, because even before the pandemic, we are facing the sustainability of air transport on the continent. And AFRA, with other stakeholders, has set new initiatives. We will have a workshop on air transport sustainability on the continent. All stakeholders will be involved. This morning, we had the first meeting of the task force. And this is very important for the continent because we need to create more resilience of air transport on the continent. Of course, liberalization, the single African air transport market, and also the African continental free trade area, which is very important because the level of trade between African states is very low. Roughly it's 16%, whereby you can see it is 50, even 60% in other regions across the world. I will stop here for time being, and I will have opportunity to discuss all these matters. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Abdelrahman, for that brief review of the challenges in Africa. I'll pass it over perhaps to Abdul now. You're joining us from the Middle East, Arab air carriers. You have a very diverse membership. You have the Gulf countries, you have North Africa, and countries in the Levant region. What does sustainability mean for your region? And also, according to you, what are the main obstacles to sustainability in a larger sense? So beyond environmental, we also talk about economic and social. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I believe, first of all, the sustainability of aviation. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Sustainability of the aviation industry and how it can actually move away from the current state of producing all of its energy out of fossil fuel to a situation where it can actually be a net impactor on the environment, a zero net impactor on the environment. I believe it's a long road. However, it's something that is inevitable. It's not only the governments who are going to set the stage for decarbonization, not only of our industry, but basically of all industries, in order to meet the targets that were set in the Paris Accord and more recently in Glasgow. So it's not only the governments, it's the public and the consumer who will demand that the aviation industry become neutral towards the environment. Now, in the region, we are no different. In fact, in the Arab Air Carriers Organization, we have adopted a resolution at our last AGM saying that our target is by 2050 to have net zero emissions for ACO members. And that goes in line with the IATA resolution, which was announced in Boston of last year. Now, to achieve that, this is the challenge. There is no silver bullet, but there is no one single party which is responsible for the emissions. So the airlines are the users, but there is a whole supply chain that actually enables the airlines to move passengers. And that supply chain and stakeholders includes technology providers, airframe engine manufacturers, includes airport facilities, it includes governments in terms of legislation and how they are going to prepare the grounds for the airlines to be able to achieve that. And it includes the division of accepting and recognizing that it is a global problem and it's not a regional issue. Sometimes, unfortunately, we see regions taking initiatives, other regions are not taking this initiative, as if one region actually cleans everything, no carbon in the air, it's not going to be affected anymore, as if it builds a wall around it and no carbon is going to seep into that region. This is wrong. The only solution is a global solution. And there is no way on earth we can achieve our target of net zero emission unless governments commit to work solely through the global conduit, which is the ICAO. And in ICAO, what we expect, at least not only in the region, but I believe the whole industry, what it expects from ICAO is not only to say the airline industry needs to achieve zero net emissions by 2050 or whatever date they are going to decide. It needs also to say that this is the roadmap how to achieve it from the manufacturer's side, from the government side, sides in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of not doing things that are not beneficial to the environment, but beneficial to their holds. And this is what is needed to be done on the airport side, on the producer side, supplier side of fuel. And based on that contribution from each and every segment that is related to the aviation industry, we can achieve a decarbonization of the aviation industry. So although I'm speaking from the standpoint of the region, but I reiterate that it is not a regional issue. It can never be a regional issue. Solutions can never be regional. The problem is not regional, and therefore the solution needs to be global. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffa. Now that we're talking about ICAO, the role of ICAO and regional solutions, I think it's a good time to hear Thomas. I know the European Union is really at the forefront of a lot of those initiatives. There was a very important declaration signed a couple of weeks ago, the Toulouse Declaration. And so can you tell us a bit more where Europe stands right now, and what kind of leadership are you planning to exert in the next few months for this agenda to become really global? Over to you.
Sure, thanks, Marcelo, and I'm happy that my colleagues from the other regions cleared the path and mentioned some of the principles I very much agree with. Maybe let's take a look at the numbers as far as the European airlines market is concerned. As you know, we always compare the numbers to 2019, which was the last normal year. So last year we've seen it wasn't great, but it was much better in terms of traffic movements compared to 2020. So last year compared to 2019, we had a capacity of 45% less than 2019, which means that still about 1.5 billion Passengers we didn't see, so 1.5 billion passengers less. We had losses of 18.5 billion euros amongst European airlines, about 5 million flights less, and about 40% of aviation-related jobs still at risk compared to 2019, so minus 40%. And because, of course, we're part of a much bigger ecosystem, you know, the travel and tourism industry in Europe, COVID contributed to 70% less hotel bookings versus 2019. So not great, obviously, but still much better than 2020. If that's the challenge we have for this year. This year, I would say, from a recovery perspective, the mood is much more upbeat than last year, and that is, of course, related to the fact that the impact of the Omicron wave seems to be receding in most parts of Europe. As we speak, national governments are winding back travel restrictions. And that's very positive because people really want to travel. You see it not only with events, people want to attend face-to-face, but people really want to travel. So as soon as those travel restrictions are eased, the next weeks, the next couple of months, those numbers will go up. In terms of flights, will go up very quickly. Right now, I mean, we're following the situation week by week at the level of Eurocontrol numbers. Right now, we're about 65% capacity compared to 2019. That's just the traffic. And the most optimistic scenario is that overall in 2022, this year versus 2019, we'll get to 70% of the capacity of 2019 or even more. It's not as good as the North American market, but you know, we're ramping up very quickly. In terms of just a little bit more when we talk about recovery. So I think it's important that what we call the individual traveler-based risk approach is being promoted, so that governments consider countries in the region, not the regions, but that they consider actually the individual, the passenger risk profile. Which will make it a lot more flexible for people to be able to travel. So the success of this year will, of course, depend on what's coming after Omicron variant, whether we will have another variant coming up, typically in the winter season. And so I would like to refer what my colleague from Africa referred to, is that the low vaccination rate in the Southern Hemisphere, and I think Africa is a very unfortunate but good example in this case. This might also impact, of course, the Northern Hemisphere, and therefore impact also the spreading of the virus, again, depending on which variant we're talking about. That's in terms of recovery, or if you will, economic sustainability. As we speak, the European Commission in Brussels is considering new regulations or digging up old regulation, trying to refresh old regulation to see what it can do as a regulator to boost and to give us the tools to boost, accelerate, I would say, the recovery this year. So that's a very hot issue. This is about making also sure that we can keep a healthy competitive market in Europe. How to restart and recover as quickly as possible. It has to do also with how airlines can deal with suppliers who will try to recuperate the losses of their revenues for the past 2 years, which is, from a business perspective, a normal reaction. I mean, you also see it at the level of people's homes. Prices are going up. Suppliers will try to recuperate their losses. But we're asking the regulator to make sure that they keep a close eye on the competitiveness of the market and of the entire value chain, because, as you know, airlines is a very cost-driven business. Now, to come to the point of the decarbonization efforts, and Marcelo, you rightly referred to the Toulouse Declaration. The Toulouse Declaration is a declaration that was made at the Toulouse Summit, the Aviation Summit, which was hosted by the French EU presidency, by France earlier this month. And the whole point of the Toulouse Declaration is that it brought together industry and governments, because the declaration wasn't only signed by the EU countries, but by over 40 countries also outside the EU, including the 27 EU countries. It was all about recognizing the need for a public-private partnership, cooperation, a true collaboration in Europe in order to be able to further decarbonize. That's one point. The second point, important point about the Toulouse Declaration is that governments have recognized the value of Destination 2050, which is a roadmap which was published on the initiative of A4E, but then also joined by airports, manufacturers, and even airspace navigation service providers in February of last year. That roadmap, Destination 2050, was then relatively quickly followed by Waypoint 2050 and IATA's recognition at its AGM, which Abdul just mentioned, to go to the same targets, which means reducing CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030 and going to net zero by 2050. Perfectly in line, of course, with the Paris Agreement. Now, the reason why the Europeans are so pushy is that because of overall, I would say, political pressure, political priorities of decarbonization overall. It doesn't only affect aviation. Europe is very adamant with its sort of Green Deal proposal, which is now translated in legislation, which we call Fit for 55, which covers all sectors, including, for instance, the building sector, which is responsible in Europe for almost 40% of CO2 emissions in Europe, which covers road transport, which is contributing about 25%, 75% within the transport sector in terms of CO2 emissions. So it's not only aviation which is being covered, but which Abdul also alluded to, the challenge is that aviation is very difficult to decarbonize. Right, so now we're trying to work under the Toulouse Declaration, which recognized Destination 2050 with the other sectors, including road and maritime, in order to help reduce CO2 emissions. As I said, the Green Deal, of which a Toulouse Declaration is a milestone, important milestone, is being developed into legislative package, which is about the revision of EU ETS, which is about how do you handle CORSIA going forward from a European perspective, which is about the question of energy taxation. Do we tax aviation on top of EU ETS in Europe? And it's also very much about the promotion of sustainable aviation fuels, which is, I mean, to be honest, for us, the top one next to technologies, SAFs are the top opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions as quickly as possible, keeping in mind the net zero target of 2050. One last point about the Toulouse Declaration. It does have an international angle, and I think this is important for today's debate, is the Toulouse Declaration was there to show the strong commitment from European stakeholders, government, industry, and NGOs, but also has a clear appeal to ICAO for the adoption of an ambitious LTAC, so a long-term aspirational goal next year, which we're all looking forward to. So Europe is trying to use this Toulouse Declaration to say, hey, ICAO, this is our ambition, and we are true about the public-private partnership. Can we do something similar at the global level? And to the earlier point, of course, we would like to see CORSIA to be really functional, that it's implemented, and Europe is here again taking the forefront. So it's very much about European pressure to adopt LTAG, which would need to take place, of course, the adoption at the next ICAO. I think it's the 41st Assembly this September. So this is it in a nutshell. I didn't touch upon social sustainability because that's a whole different kettle of fish. But we do, when thinking about social sustainability, we do very much like to push the idea is that investing in decarbonization. Yes, it's going to be extremely costly. We all need to do our bits across the board, across industry. But in terms of aviation, we should never forget it's a global industry, which is mentioned before. We need a global solution. That's hence the importance of ICAO going forward. But we also, from a European perspective, need to make sure that aviation has a social role, a connectivity role. Up in 2019, connectivity had never been that high, and the number of destinations had really exploded. Prices had really gone down quite a bit because of the liberalization of the past 2 decades or so in Europe. So ideally, we would like to go back to that situation. The only big challenge is that we have to deal with a COVID crisis, and on top of that, we are being forced to further decarbonize. So the timing is extremely challenging in order to go back to growth in a green manner. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Thomas. That was a very comprehensive review, and I think that we're going to touch upon some of those topics you just mentioned, like private-public partnerships, the role of ICAO, and the importance of having roadmaps. And on that topic of roadmaps, I know that Canada has been struggling with the reopening of its borders. The industry has asked several times the current government to provide a roadmap for that reopening. So on that point, Suzanne, it'd be great if you can tell us a bit about your experience as an industry during COVID-19, lessons learned, and the path for sustainability for the Canadian airline industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. And with Thomas' remark in comparing some of the data between the EU and the North American market, I suspect that some of this data is very much centered based on numbers from the United States. In Canada, Canada's airlines have been hit extremely hard by the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, our members collectively carried over 80 million passengers annually, directly employed 60,000 people, and served a critical component of Canada's air transport tourism sector. And that supported over 630,000 jobs approximately. And we are nowhere near our recovery of 2019. Early in the pandemic, our members were operating at approximately 10 to 15% of their capacity, and some ceased operations altogether. And regretfully, we're still sitting at a fraction of those 2019 numbers. Only this past Tuesday did the Government of Canada announce some of the alleviation to the travel restriction measures. Aviation in Canada remained for the most part at stage 0 as per the ICAO CART, which is the Council on Aviation Recovery Task Force, for the most of the pandemic. And only in past August 2021 did we see the reopening of our borders to non-essential travel to citizens from the United States. And then this was followed in September 2021 by opening to foreign nationals. And then, of all of you know, as we were really thinking we were on the road to recovery and restart, Omicron hit us all, and it hit us pretty hard. But as many of you alluded to, we're a very resilient industry, and in Canada, the carriers did adapt. And we've been working hand in hand with the Government of Canada for the past 2 years, and we do plan on continuing to do that. In Canada, we have one of the top vaccination rates in the world, and we brought in safety measures as an entire sector, quickly including vaccine requirements for all employees and travelers. But as I mentioned, only this past Tuesday did the Government of Canada announce the alleviation of some measures, which includes now the opportunity to use a rapid antigen test for pre-departure. We do think that this was a missed opportunity. In aligning with other states, for example, we do know that, as Thomas said, the dropping of certain measures, for example, in the EU, we've seen France, Denmark, Switzerland. We've also seen the UK at the beginning of February. So we're still calling on the Government of Canada for a roadmap. The reality is that Canada's economic recovery won't happen without the recovery of the aviation industry. It's been quite a challenging 2 years. It's been quite a ride. We've been navigating the myriad of regulatory challenges resulting from the pandemic, all the while being mindful of the financial sustainability of each respective organization. And it's been quite challenging to overcome. And we do think that we've done our best successfully. Having said that, it's also exposed a few vulnerabilities in the system. In Canada, we have a user pay system, And so we do think that many of these discussions need to concentrate around how do we prevent this type of such a monolithic effect on the entire aviation sector in Canada from occurring again. So now that the next phase of work, we're hopefully exiting or seeing a bright light at the end of the tunnel, we do think that we need to center on recovery and rebuilding the aviation business throughout Canada and as a global industry. As mentioned, we're still calling on the Canadian government for a plan, a roadmap that looks at dropping pre-departure testing for fully vaccinated travelers altogether. And then I would also add just some comments, as the other speakers made as well, about the globally harmonized approach to this. Absolutely. Although politics are local, and we've all experienced this to varying degrees in aviation throughout this pandemic, aviation is global, and it's built on global and mutually accepted standards. And we're only as strong when we're coordinated and harmonized with other jurisdictions. So we'll be very much looking forward to ICAO, IATA, the WHO, and other international organizations. And we do think they have their work cut out for them in hosting the discussions for realignment and ensuring harmonizations. And we know we must practice good health. Our industry is in the business of moving people and goods across the world, and we have an ultra safe industry. And we have to get together and to have these inputs into these decisions. So with that, I would say that the power of exchanging ideas and preparing for a post-COVID future together must remain our collective top priority across all regions. And there definitely is a lot more work to be done. And one thing for sure is there'll never be a dull moment.
Thank you, Suzanne, for that. We'll go back to that, again, global coordination during the Q&A and discussion section. But we have a panelist joining us as well. He's based in Tbilisi, Georgia. He's a seasoned industry person from that region. Georgia signed the Toulouse Declaration, as I understand. And Georgia, I know, has been very, very proactive in reopening its borders, very depending on tourism. But also, Igor, I know you're involved in several regional initiatives around Georgia, and your region is very much challenged as well by geopolitics, right? You had Azerbaijan and Armenia conflict last year, and there's tensions these days in Ukraine as well. So can we even talk about sustainability in your region, or do you see a clear divide between the countries that are more concerned on geopolitics versus that future path to sustainability? And again, welcome to our panel.
Thank you, Marcelo. Greetings, everyone. Greetings from Georgia. I'm very happy and very honored to be part of this fantastic panel. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Basically, as you know, it's Georgia is right in the crossroads of Europe and Asia, has always been part of the historical Silk Road. And basically, we're a region that connects Asia and Europe. And Georgia is, like you have mentioned, very much basically more than 10% of the country's GDP is from tourism. And out of that, approximately 2.5% is on aviation. So it was a big hit for us, as you can imagine, like for any other countries, but especially for us, because our economy is very heavily dependent on tourism and aviation. And basically in 2020, for the whole year, all the flights were canceled. We had to close down our airspace, and we were only able to open our skies basically from February of 2021. But thankfully, we see a very fast recovery, what we are observing during the whole year. If we sum up 2021, we were able to regain more than 85% of the flights that we have if we compare to the period of 2019. Almost all airlines that were flying before, they basically started re-entering the market. A lot of low-cost carriers like Wizz Air that is based in Kutaisi Airport, they managed to come back, and they have a base there, so they started to fly from the base. They opened more than 16 flights to Europe, and the airlines that used our airspace, if we look into Eurocontrol statistics, we regained 68%, which is not bad if we compare to the situation with our neighboring countries. But unfortunately, we couldn't say the same for the passenger traffic, which we regained about 48%, which took us all the way back to our 2016 levels, actually, which is again not bad because some countries, especially the region, were dropped a lot further from 2010 and even back, unfortunately, on the level. So we did a pretty good job. The government did a lot of good initiatives from the beginning, which was basically how we handled all the internal, COVID procedures, how we managed to attract still tourists that were, were coming to Georgia, not only from the, traditional markets, but also we managed to identify new markets, which basically we never worked with before. So we actually saw a lot of additional passenger flow from other, non-traditional markets. And then we, by the end of the year, we tried to focus and have a very, different strategy in terms of aviation and tourism. And we identified so-called green corridors among our neighboring countries, and we had this safe, we call them safe bubbles that we managed to identify. And we worked very closely with the tourism administrations, with their ministries of economy, and we managed to grab a lot of new traffic coming from, let's say, the STAN countries, for example. We had a lot of tourists from Kazakhstan, a lot of tourists from Ukraine, and other neighboring countries, some new markets from the Middle East. So if we again compare to the situation that we had, the unfortunate situation of again last year with the Delta variant that came right in the middle of the summer season, which was traditionally the season that we had the most tourists, and now by the end of the year we had this Omicron, which again is causing some problems. But just to have it to say in a nutshell, we still are very happy with the way the year ended, and we just hope that this year will be much better. Of course, if there will be hopefully no more new variants, besides that, there are also a lot of other challenges that I would like to mention apart from this COVID situation. Of course, there's a very big rise on fuel prices. There's a lot of other things, especially for airlines that cause their operating costs to rise. So it's not only this new variants and COVID situation, but also a lot of other issues that might slow down a little bit our optimistic views this year. But I still hope that it'll be much better year than we had last year. And of course, from my forecast, I think by 2023 we should be very close to reaching again the levels that we had pre-COVID, at least for Georgia and for this region. So we can only hope for the best, and let's see how everything will develop in the future.
Great, thanks, Igor, for that quick review of your region. So now let's start the discussion. I mean, we've been as an industry, we've been promoting global coordination. I think the industry has done a lot to push for that coordination. There's been a lot of initiatives at the level of global industry associations, regional associations. So I think we can say that the industry has done its best to show the path towards recovery. However, and I think this is something we touched upon last year when we met, there's been the issue of public health authorities protecting national populations based on a national agenda that is definitely not global. And when we think about sustainability going forward and the prominence that environmental ministers will have in pushing that agenda forward, of course, they're not going to be the only ones, but this will be a very influential theme to move this agenda. What is the likelihood that we're going to fall again into this global versus national interest considering that ICAO is a forum where the framework could be discussed, the framework could be decided and agreed upon. However, the implementation still belongs to the states. Abdul, perhaps I know you have some views about this, on how we can move things forward, so we can perhaps kick up the discussion with you.
Maybe I have ideas, but how to move things forward, this is a different story altogether. You know, honestly, let me be very frank. We have done a great job as regional, international associations, organizations, in order to address what is the right way to deal with a crisis which is global, at the right level and in the right measures. Unfortunately, and by the way, the same applies to ICAO, WHO, IATA, other regional organizations. They did what they were supposed to do, which is trying to develop coherence, harmony, and risk-based measures and sensible measures of in addressing the first global pandemic that we faced in almost more than 100 years. Where we failed, not us, where the failure happened is at the level of the national governments. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them. What is shocking was that all of these governments participate in the WHO meetings, ICAO meetings, even EU meetings, regional organizations like the Arab League, and so on and so forth, and agree on something, agree on a set of measures or guidelines that are harmonious, that are scientific, that are risk-based. They go back to their own countries and they throw away everything they have agreed upon in these international and regional organizations. Now, my biggest dilemma is those same governments have spent billions and billions of dollars in the last 75 years to establish those organizations specifically to deal with transnational crises, specifically to deal with international crises. And with the first international crisis that we have faced in 100 years, not, of course, forgetting the 2 world wars, what happened is that they went back, those same governments, to the same playbooks that they have used 100 years ago. So the first thing the health minister did, what did we do when we faced what is called Spanish plague? And they applied the same measures, quarantine, as if we are still, you know, going on in ships, and so on and so forth. Now, my fear is, unfortunately, and this is extremely unfortunate, that we, you know, many governments, policymakers, politicians, they have not matured enough into the globality of the world we are living in today. They are still hostages to the national, I don't want to call it boundaries, no, national walls they have, they think that their countries are living in. And if that bodes anything towards the discussion of the ICAO on the climate change, it bodes not well. I really hope that governments are now, you know, they have learned from their experience. Many governments have learned from their experience of last year. This is why we see measures that are becoming more and more sensible in as far as COVID is concerned. Even with the new wave of Omicron, governments did not start, you know, locking down left, right, and center, closing airports and so on, except very few. So what is good is that it means they have learned from last year's experience. Now, whether that learning process will apply on the environment by fall of this year, with regards to the environment, I have a big question mark. I hope it will. I hope that this is another issue of global case of existential case, climate change, that cannot be addressed nationally, nor can it be addressed regionally. It has to be addressed globally. I hope they have learned the lesson from COVID, and they will go to ICAO with the mindset of not, I want to protect my national interests, because there are no national interests when the climate is going to move beyond any way of reform, or any way of trying to actually remove the effects, the lethal effects of what will happen to the environment. So I hope so. I'm not, I hope that the governments, especially the ones who have set already very, very tough national agendas, but I'm still hoping that these are negotiating tactics. They will go to ICAO with the mindset of getting to an agreement, and most importantly, not only getting an agreement, but implementing it. Because we know ICAO can only issue resolutions, but unless there is a treaty, there is no, stick behind the resolution. I hope that governments are going to see that working together harmoniously is the only way to deal with the global issues, and that applies on the environment.
Now, Thomas, I think the Europe is a very good case study of having a government in Brussels that is very at the forefront of pushing for this sustainability, decarbonization agenda. And then also at the same time, you have this diversity of states that do not all perhaps are in full agreement to that, or maybe not an agreement, but sometimes don't have the resources, or perhaps other priorities. I know the role of the European Union internationally. It comes across as a bloc of countries. But what's the situation internally? How are you handling that diversity and those national interests within your union?
Yeah, thanks, Marcelo. What Abdul described is not new. I think the challenge of almost every single international or intergovernmental organization, you have the challenge that people agree somewhere in the headquarters in the principle, and they go back and they feel the pressure of national constituencies, and for that reason they take different measures. I can tell you that in a quasi-federal system, because it's not a federal system, it's somewhere between intergovernmental and a federal system, we have exactly the same challenge. And as lobbyists in Brussels, we always make the joke as, yes, we're based in Brussels here, our leg is in Brussels, but we should have an arm that reaches far enough into the national capitals. What it means is whatever comes out of the Brussels legislative mill, it doesn't mean that much. The question is always, how is it going to be implemented nationally? And you see that in all dossiers, because we're talking, I think, two sort of dossiers here. One is the recovery aviation and the role of the COVID travel restrictions in that, and decarbonization on the other hand. It's two different challenges, which unfortunately come at the same time. And you think in the same dossiers, take decarbonization, for instance. I think the one common line in Europe for historic reasons is that everyone agrees that we all need to do our bit in terms of decarbonization in any sector. Right, that's a nice principle to agree upon. And this is what the Fit for 55 package is actually a very good reflection of. It actually points the finger to the biggest polluters. And we're actually, as aviation, a very small part of that. Now, having said that, you could predict it. Last summer, these Fit for 55 decarbonization proposals, Fit for 55, were presented. Literally the day after, the French government said, it's all very nice, but as far as this and this is concerned, I don't agree. And these are dossiers that also the member states, they see it coming for months. It's not that it's a big secret when the European Commission launches the legislative proposal. So immediately you see a country like France, but also other countries hiding behind other countries, is they immediately think about the national impact. And you see now that the devil, of course, is in the detail. It's nice to say we all want to be green, but being green, like being something else, has a price. It comes with a ticket, a very costly ticket as far as the ambition of Europe is concerned. If you want to go to net zero as a society, it's all going to cost us a lot of money. And now you're in the situation that the national parliaments have to think, like, Brussels is working on this plan. What is this going to be? What does this mean for my population? How do I explain to people that, oh, by the way, you've just built a very nice house, but sorry, it's not good enough to get to net zero by 2050. So forget that house. What, are you going to tear it down? You're going to force people to stop building. So this is really hitting the heart of the problem. What I'm afraid of, and maybe it's interesting maybe to compare it with the other regions, is that the European Commission has proposed this wonderful Fit for 55 package. I'm a little bit afraid that the politicians are going to be so opportunistic, as they usually are, and say, well, we're going to regulate aviation. We're going to tax aviation further to improve decarbonization, but we're not going to do much about, the building sector, or, having people having 2-3 cars running on diesel or gas, because that's not a very popular measure. So what I'm saying is, unfortunately for us in Europe, and I'm sure it's true in the other regions, aviation is not on top of the agenda of the national politicians, right? And I'm a little bit afraid that we will pay the price for, society wanting to go green. That is, until people have to pay for it. And that's where the national politicians, I'm afraid, will sort of not give us the support. Because what we are proposing through the roadmap, by the way, and IATA is doing the same with the same objectives to decarbonize by net zero by 2050. These are very real. It's a roadmap. These are real measures with numbers on it, with a roadmap that's actually going to have an impact on demand, whether we like it or not, and where prices of the ticket are going up. They're not going down, even in a competitive market. So the difference is people don't realize it yet. Again, aviation is just a small bit of what I would call the societal challenge of going green. And just one point I want to pick up on what Abdul said. This is really about the transformation, societal transformation of the green energies, in the decarbonization effort. Hydrogen is a good example. Can we solve the problem as aviation with just going hydrogen? No, we need the other sectors, the heavy industries, to invest heavily, hugely in net zero energy forms like hydrogen and renewables and then maybe, we are a relatively small user of hydrogen. If we would go hydrogen as a new propulsion technology, we are bound to work with the other industries in the hope that they will follow our path as well. So there's a lot of challenges, and at the end, we'll have our passengers will have to pay for it. At the end of the day, the end user will pay, and this is the challenge for the airlines. And this is why we need extremely good cooperation with our suppliers, with the airports, with the fuel suppliers, with the OEMs. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to make it happen, even with the best government support, even with a great regulatory framework, which is technology neutral, which is, incentivizing the best practices, et cetera, even in the best circumstances, it's going to be extremely tough. And it's okay, but I think we need to be honest about it.
Rafael, now that we're talking about the politics of the sustainability agenda, in Latin America, the Caribbean is an extremely political region, unstable in some cases. The pendulum goes from right to center to left and beyond. What are the prospects for organizing this at a regulatory level from a continental perspective?
Yeah, well, thank you, Marcelo. I mean, I think that the previous speakers were really touching very, very important points, and I totally agree with what they said. The challenge that we have in Latin America is that as opposed to North America or US or Europe, we don't have a single person to talk to. We don't have an FAA or an EASA to talk to. I mean, we are dealing with many different countries. So from that point of view, we have to go and revert and go talk to ICAO. I mean, ICAO is our point of contact for that. So I just wanted to basically illustrate what some of our colleagues, what our friends before were saying, that demonstrate this disconnect, between aspirational goals and very specifics on how do we go about and make this happen. One almost feels that this is management by Twitter, I mean, let's go neutral by 2050. Oh, that looks very nice, but then how do you make it happen? And just to illustrate, you mentioned the Caribbean. In the airport industry, it's probably easier, in inverted commas, to go green, what is concerned about specifically on the infrastructure on the ground, than, for example, for the airlines, because of the challenges of actually, going hydrogen or electric or whatever. But, for example, smaller airports handling less than 1 million passengers in the Caribbean, it is relatively easy to go neutral, carbon neutral, by the installation of solar panels, PV, photovoltaic cells. You could actually generate 100% of your needs, but there is absolutely no incentive, because it just happens that those countries, in order to protect their electricity company, they don't let you sell the electricity the extra electricity that you are generating. So there is zero incentive for the airport to go green, to go 100% neutral, because you don't know what to do with that energy. I mean, so it's very, very frustrating, having to deal with these sort of situations. And so, yes, I agree with the previous speakers in that the challenge is going to be within the country, okay? And that is the sort of thing that we are dealing with in Latin America. These attitudes of the countries adopting a very protectionistic attitude towards certain industries. And as our friend from Airlines for Europe was saying, aviation is a very easy target. It's visual. You can see it. Everybody flies, So it's a very easy one to point your finger towards, And unfortunately, in Latin America, we don't have the luxury of having the option of going by high-speed train or just by train, not even high speed, by train or highway. Aviation is absolutely fundamental for the social and economic development of our countries. And I'm afraid that fingers are going to be pointing towards aviation. And actually, I was saying it yesterday at Roots Americas, we're discussing this with Peter Serda from IATA Americas, saying that many countries in our region still see aviation as something for the elite. And they forget, they don't think about the fact that many students have to go to university using the plane. Many families actually see each other because thanks to the plane, there is no option. And yet, it's very visual and very easy to point towards. And yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I don't have the answer, but other than to say that we have to work very hard.
Now, Rafael, also, I know you're a big advocate of liberalization.
Yeah.
International. How do you see this playing into the sustainability agenda as well?
Absolutely. This is, we were discussing this the other day, Marcelo, indeed. This is for me absolutely crucial. I mean, the opening up of the liberalization of skies in Latin America is absolutely essential. We are still dealing with a region where people adopt these very protectionist attitudes, and as I was saying before, the possibility of actually opening up the markets and letting any airline fly wherever they want, is something that we are really pushing very hard, or we are going to be pushing very hard, because that is perhaps one of the ways, one of the paths to actually ensure that we achieve perhaps that social, and economic sustainability, which are the other legs of this sustainability agenda. That is, for me, absolutely essential. I am hopeful, not hopeful with the liberalization. There's another aspect here, which is electric aviation that, perhaps is not going to solve, the problems of crossing the Atlantic, but maybe for small regions like, the Caribbean and so on, maybe there's some opportunities there. But if there is no liberalization, that ain't going to happen. So, still, liberalization is indeed very hot topic, very high on my agenda, and we're going to be pushing very hard for that.
And Suzanne, on the issue of regional connectivity and regional access to remote regions, I know this has been an issue in Canada for a long time, where you see the hub airports dominating the international scene, most of the international flights, and regional airports are a bit sort of the forgotten airports in this. How can we, what do you think should be the proposal of the industry going forward in Canada to correct this and to provide a greater connectivity? Let's start by transborder connectivity, US-Canada. You mentioned the user principles, one of them. Are there any other paths perhaps to make a better level playing field for those airports and their international connectivity?
Well,
you mean, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rafael.
No, go ahead.
Well, Marcelo, I can't speak to the airports, and I believe that's why Rafael was jumping in. But what I can speak to is airlines in the Canadian context. From the Canadian context and connectivity, in 2019, prior to the pandemic, Canada enjoyed, I think, the best connectivity it had ever enjoyed. To some of the points that Abdul had mentioned about some of the challenges with COVID and the management of it and the regional perspective, in Canada, we are an industry, the aviation industry is federally regulated. So it's regulated by the Canadian government. But we also are a country that has 10 provinces and 3 territories. So during this pandemic, there was local public health measures that were put in. And this varied with certain regions that had in, for example, quarantine requirements or different requirements for testing in order to travel and enter certain areas. And then we had this massive impact on the Canadian industry that affected operations that pretty much grinded some early in the pandemic to a halt. So it had a devastating effect on connectivity. The government of Canada did recognize this, and it did put in a lot of efforts in order to continue prioritizing the movement of goods and peoples to certain areas in Canada. We have the North, for example. But just to Abdul's point earlier, when we look at the 193 contracting states, and of course, Canada is part of that at ICAO, and we enjoy hosting ICAO here in Montreal, that will be the challenges in how we recover. I think one of our challenges will be, in the Canadian perspective, but I think as a global initiative as well, is just continually reassuring governments and the traveling public that flying is safe. You know, there's been discussions here about targeting aviation in the context of environments, but of course, aviation has been targeted in the context of this pandemic. And I think this continues to be one of our focuses. Flying on Canada's airlines has always been safe. In my opening remarks, I did mention that we're an ultra-safe industry built on decades of continuous improvement, and we are regulated by safety management systems here in Canada and pretty much throughout the world. And I think the reality from the Canadian perspective, and it would be interesting to know from the global perspective, but for example, the importation of COVID from international travel, for example, was incredibly small throughout the pandemic, sitting at approximately 1%. So these are the conversations that I think Abdul was referring to in the beginning as well. When we look at the sustainability of the system from a global perspective and the agreements of the Chicago Convention and of course the WHO International Health Regulations 2005, is how do we keep moving forward and not looking over our shoulder for the next variant? How do we have a playbook and a plan for if and when the next variant or the next pandemic occurs? So that's what I can offer. Thank you.
Abdul, I think you have a comment.
Yeah, but to Susan's point, you know, if you look at countries like, let me take for example the UAE. The UAE policy was, we want to protect our citizens, the residents here in the UAE, but with a view of openness, not to try to just you know, lock down the economy, everything and so on. And the end result was that they are almost back to where they were. I'm talking about the UAE, not the airlines of the UAE, because if you take two of the airlines of the UAE, like Etihad and Emirates, they are globally based, and their footprint is very wide. And because of the slowness in the recovery, they have not recovered as yet, in a way that even comes close to 2019 levels. But the problem is that the governments have taken measures not because the travelers were fearful of traveling. If you go today on any flight, you will find it almost packed full with people. And they are all forced, obliged to wear masks and so on and so forth. So basically, it's not COVID which prevented travel. And I repeat what my friend Willie Walsh has said in his acceptance speech in IATA. It was the governments who prevented people from traveling. And this entrenchment in the what they talk about as national interest. What was the end result? When you talk about aviation, you don't talk about aviation in terms of flying. You talk about aviation as a multiplier to the economy, to economic activity, to growth, and to job creation. And this is where actually those decisions, which were based on policies of fear from blame. Health minister would say, I don't want to be blamed, so better safe than sorry, close down everything. And if actually the virus went, around everywhere in the country, it's not my fault. I didn't allow the virus to come from the outside, but somehow it sneaked in. So it is those policies of fear from blame that result in absolutely nothing, because we are living in a global village. We cannot bring back the time of tribes living across the world, numbering all of them 50 million. So this needs to be understood by the governments. Actually, I don't in my discussions with the governments, I am very careful not to use the term that travelers do not have confidence in travel. No, they do have full confidence in travel, and they are willing to travel, provided you governments allow them to travel with the minimum hassle that there is there. Abdurrahman said that he was almost offloaded because he didn't have that QR code. If you travel and you transit one country, you would have to have a number of health certificates and so on and so on. While 50, 60, 70 years ago, there was one yellow card approved by the WHO and issued by each health ministry in each country of the world that allowed travelers to have one health certificate and travel around the world. Isn't that, Abdurrahman? It still applies in some parts of Africa. So unfortunately, the politicians of today in many countries are amateurs. They are populists, and they don't think of leadership. They think of following, what the public opinion is, and we are going to, carry the burden of that kind of policies, and to extrapolate that on the environment. If Thomas, I totally agree with you that it's not going to be easy. But the worst part is going to be if we don't get to an agreement. This is the worst part, because everybody is going to try to be more populist than the other in imposing taxes, penalties, and so on. And what will be the target? Aviation, easily visible. So I'm sorry for this, long intervention.
I'm going to play a bit the devil's advocate, and then this is a question for the panel, but isn't it the role of national governments to be accountable to their national populations? I mean, ultimately, they are the ones who elected them, and so they should be accountable to them and not to a global community that in some
May I
cases
answer
is
that?
far from the national reality.
May I answer that? Because, especially because I'm living in Lebanon, and in Lebanon, all the politicians are corrupt, all of them. And actually the people keep on electing them. Now, proper politicians are responsible for the well-being of the country and its population. That includes the opportunities for growth of the economy. That includes policies that are implemented on the fiscal policies, whether you are going to attract investments or not. That includes job creation. That includes education, and so on and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, locking down a country, closing down an economy, closing down an airport, what do you want to achieve from that to prevent the virus from coming in? But the virus didn't stop. And you know, the virus spread was very high. The contribution of travel was less than 1% in adding to the number of the infected people. But you kept on, as a government, you kept on employing these policies for almost a year plus, which how many, since you are responsible as a government and accountable to your actions, how many jobs were lost? Well, can those jobs be returned? How many hotels have closed down? How many people went to the street? What happened to the restaurants? And all of these, you know, all of these economic interests and businesses that are reliant on travel have been squashed by policies which were wrongly made. Now, accountability does not only apply on how many people came in and brought the virus with them. Accountability applies also on, did I manage a crisis well, or did I not, or did I mismanage it to the extent that I have increased my joblessness from 5% to 15%. This is where accountability lies.
Yeah. Rafael, a question for you. I mean, again, we know Latin America tends to be very politicized, and I know that in Latin America, you had both extremes. You had countries that were completely closed for several months, Colombia, Peru, Chile. But also you have countries who never closed, like Mexico. What can we learn from that dynamics, the political dynamics? Because I think, you know, you have these variations, and ultimately the ones that didn't close at all are actually the ones who are doing very well today. So any comments about the politics of pandemic crisis management?
Yeah, you know, it is very interesting because the only country that never closed at all was Mexico, which is actually run by we could call it a populist government, okay, or a prime or a president, you know. But he actually adopted a measure that was completely the opposite from many other countries where they also, you know, decided to go on lockdown. I don't know if we can learn anything about the politics of this, but I think that we can learn from the fact that indeed it didn't make any difference from the point of view of the impact of the virus. I mean, in the places that were locked down, the virus spread just as much as those countries where it was actually open. And the impact on the economy, of course, the countries that were open, they are much better off today. So from the point of politics, I think that, yes, that management by Twitter that we were talking about before didn't work. You know, it fired back. Actually, you fared much worse than the others. So that's my only thing that I can say there. I mean, indeed, the countries that are right now open include Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. You don't need anything to go to these countries. Nothing. You don't even have to be vaccinated. You just show up there and that's it. And they are doing very, very well. And the spread of the virus is exactly the same as in Chile or in Argentina or in Uruguay, which were the countries that were under lockdown. Okay, so yeah, that's the only thing I can say.
Rahman, Igor, perhaps a few comments at this point.
Yes, what is surprising me, in fact, yes, what is surprising me in fact, is that since the pandemic started, we had regionally a lot of meetings with African Union, with Africa CDC, with other stakeholders. And we know that we have recommendations from WHO, and we have the ICAO card as well. And what is being done in states is completely different. It's not complying with those recommendations. And I have a feeling that we have worked as an aviation industry, and in fact, the health ministry departments are taking the lead and imposing measures which are really impacting our industry. And we need to think about if really these measures are efficient. If you look at the case of Omicron, for example, people said it started in South Africa. In 1 or 2 weeks, it was everywhere in the world, despite this kind of restrictions which were in place. And even these restrictions were reinforced after the Omicron. So we need really to ask ourselves, is it really logic to continue like this? That's what I said. We need really to learn lessons from what happened since 2 years to be better for the management or future crises, similar crises. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to pretty much all the cases, especially in Latin America, because we're pretty much similar in terms of, geography and the society. And yeah, it's been a very big test for everybody, I think, for governments, for politicians, for everybody in all the sectors, especially sectors that are really, like transport and aviation and tourism. And I can pretty much say exactly the same. The more restrictions that were put, the more closure of different sectors that we had last year and 2020, the more cases we had. Actually, it worked really the opposite way. And the moment that we opened finally the sector, which was again a step-by-step approach, then everything went back to normal, and we the new normal, of course, but I can totally relate, and I can say, that it was pretty much the same situation. And now we had this, for example, this green passports that were introduced last year in October, where you had to be fully vaccinated, or you had to have COVID within the last 6 months, and that's how you get this green green passports. And without those passports, you couldn't go anywhere, to the cafe or restaurant, or you can attend any indoor meetings and things like this. And finally they understood that it doesn't work. It actually makes no sense to have it, especially with this Omicron case that we are seeing now. And they were just canceled with I think 2 weeks now. It has been totally canceled. So I think the government and everybody, all the regulators, are slowly starting to realize, and again are taking very good. It was like a test. So we have to evaluate last year. We have to evaluate what we did in 2020, and we have to make sure not to make those mistakes again. I mean, in the beginning, it was very logical because nobody really knew the scale. We didn't know what was happening, and of course, maybe the first 3-4 months, we took the same approach. I mean, because we didn't know what to expect. But then what we have seen, I think, during the whole 2020, we had to make more more logical decisions quickly, and not to even make this problems even worse like we saw last year. So I really hope that this will not continue this way, and we really have to understand that by closing down all the sectors and everything, it only makes worse. So we have to take those good examples like Scandinavia, like countries in Latin America. There are a lot of, countries that, dealt in a little bit different way and are pretty much very close to reaching the 2019 levels now. So in all sectors, not only aviation, like, in tourism and, this hotels and, restaurants and things like this, hospitality service. So I think we have to, within the couple of months, I really foresee that some of the restrictions that we still have few in place, I think will be removed. So I think this is something that I would like to see happening everywhere, pretty much.
Thank you, Igor, for those comments. So we have only a few minutes left to this webinar, and I'd like to look ahead and to the ICAO General Assembly in September, when countries will meet and discuss and agree on some of those issues we've been talking about today. And I want to go back to the environment, environmental sustainability. I mean, we know that China, India, Brazil to some extent, perhaps others, are not fully on to that agenda. So the likelihood of a global consensus, I think, and I think I'm optimistic by nature, but I think I'm trying to be realistic here, might not be fully 100% agreed. So assuming that that's going to be the case, then what will be the second best solution and how you see things going forward from there if no agreement is reached and we go back to a fragmented approach to tackle the decarbonization and environment? And I'd like to go to have your comments, perhaps like 30 seconds, 1 minute each of you. And I'll start, maybe I'll close with Thomas, because I know you're very, very at the forefront of this and you very much believe in, but perhaps I'll start with Rafael.
All right, so with me?
Yeah.
Okay, no, very, very quickly, to be absolutely honest, as far as airports go, and at least in Latin America, and I would say all around the world, airports are not listening to ICAO. They are doing their own thing. They're going green. As simple as that, because it makes sense. It makes business sense. The reduction in operating costs that come with the finding solutions like, for example, photovoltaic panels makes a lot of sense. And that is actually not only that, because they actually do believe in a green agenda. They are actually implementing these measures because not only you reduce CO2 emissions, but also it's actually cheaper to operate. So they are doing it anyway. They are not waiting for ICAO.
Suzanne.
Marcelo, on this, I'll have to revert this over to some of the other colleagues here on board. This talk today, I regret that I don't have any information to add, and I'd mentioned that prior to this convening.
Okay, Abdelrahman.
Yes, for me, it's a global issue, and there is need to have a global agreement, of course. The African continent is.
Let's start from the hypothesis that this will not happen. They will not be that consensus.
Okay.
What is the fallback position of your region and your airlines
we need to continue our efforts to reduce our carbon footprint, even if it's very low, in fact. I have to recognize in terms of fleet planning to renew the fleet, sustainable fuels also. And I do hope that the regulators will not impose new taxes to airlines. Thank you.
Tax. Okay, thank you. Abdul.
Well, and the prospect or possibility of not having an agreement in ICAO, the only alternative is to try to have regional approaches. We are all moving at a speed basically defined by the European Union. And I have to give credit, on this front to the European Union, that were it not for the EU ETS and its international application, the disputes that emerged from that, we wouldn't have had CORSIA. Because the airline industry, up until 2009, were saying we're fine, nothing to look at here. We're only 2%, we're great, we're efficient, and so on and so forth. Only in 2009 and 2010, with the threat of the EU ETS, the industry has moved towards having specific targets. And CORSIA was possible because of the EU movement. And the EU Fit for 55 and the other initiatives are now forcing the agenda that ICAO needs to get to an agreement. But failing that, I believe what we will try to do, in the Arab world at least, is to have a common understanding amongst governments, because it's a governmental issue. And if we are able to get that common understanding and we can bridge that understanding with what the Europeans are thinking to create an inter-regional understanding about the issue of how the aviation and the climate change would be, we would go that way. But still hoping that ICAO pass will work.
Igor, very quickly before I pass it to Thomas.
Yes, it's very important. Of course, it's a global issue and a very important issue for us as well, because you know that we are part of the Common Aviation Area Agreement since 2011. We're EU associated state, so we're doing our best to implement all this, apart from ICAO, of course, regulations, to implement EU regulations, which is one of the very serious and very important, this CORSIA that we are hearing about. So we are doing this slowly because our industry and of course, especially the airlines, they need a little bit of a transitional period because, this was something that they were not used to doing before, especially during the Soviet times and after. But this is something that we are moving, towards too. We have the regulation that covers this will be implemented in steps. So actually from this year, all the airlines, Georgian airlines that are registered in Georgia, they will have to fully comply by the end of the year. So the ones that have, of course, international flights will be fully regulated, and they have to comply with this regulation. But again, we have to work. I mean, this has to be something that, like we have mentioned regarding the taxes and everything, because it has to be maximally, dealt in a way that will not be additional burden to the airline. Because if it's really, because all the operating costs, they have huge operating costs now with I mentioned with the fuel prices that are increasing, all the other costs that are COVID related, and like for sustainability, of course, we have like region like us, we have this also political risks with the Ukraine and regional with, you mentioned Armenia and Azerbaijan, the war tensions that they had like last year. So I hope this will not be like an additional burden for airlines and for airports. So this is something that has to be dealt together with the governments. But of course, this is number one, as a top priority for Georgia now, that all the airlines and all the local players have to comply. And
okay,
I believe
thank you, Tom. I just need to close because we're really a bit over even the time. Thomas, you have I'm giving you sort of the closing remarks of today's roundtable in terms of if that agreement, that global agreement, does not happen in September at ICAO, what's the fallback position and how do you intend to move forward with the sustainability agenda?
Well, I'm afraid there's not going to be a fallback position. And too bad for the European airlines. No, I mean, European airlines, have been historically committed, where the old discussion was a bit like what Rafael would say, we do it because it makes business sense. Now that it's taken a step further because of the whole societal consensus in Europe that we need to do more than it's just good for business. And for airports, again, we're comparing apples with pears. For airports, sometimes I wish I were in the position of ACI because it makes a lot of sense. Actually, you can make money with the right investments in green technologies. So, but for airlines, there's no way back. We have a roadmap. We are committed up to the leadership of all companies. The shareholders are closely watching it. So the whole mood is going green. and people are now trying to figure out how to pay for it. Who's going to be paid for what? There is really no way back. What I'm concerned about is if ICAO is dragging its feet or continues to drag its feet, including the non or bad implementation of a CORSIA, this will be more food for thought, including in Europe, for NGOs or activists to say, you see, we told you, ICAO and CORSIA's blah, 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 it's not strong enough. In return, we're going to be better than that. So I think it might potentially not, looking at status quo, but it would be another argument for certain NGOs to say, we need to do better than that. So this is going to be our job. That's one. And two, I think the specter or the argument of distortion of international competition from a European carrier perspective towards the others, I think that would might become very, very much alive for true reasons. There are good arguments to say that, but it is what it is. I would say in Europe, we are in the situation where we have to deal with it. We need to make it work. And I think it's good that at least we have been proactive with Destination 2050. Had we not been proactive, rather than complain and wait and sit and wait, ready to be shot, at least now, we have a plan that makes sense. Yes, it's going to cost all of us a lot of money, but it's a plan that we think will work. It's a rational plan where an increasing number of parliamentarians, national politicians, and even green NGOs say, well, that makes sense, let's work with you. So I'd rather have the collaborative approach than, the hide and seek approach, because, and constantly complaining about the situation. In Europe, we had no choice given the societal priority of going green, but to roll up our sleeves and to make the best of it. And I think, yes, I think we'll need to continue to do that. We don't have a choice. And by the way, in Europe, everyone is convinced that this is a good thing to do. So we'll do it also together with our passengers.
Thank you, Thomas. And I'd like to thank you in closing to all the members of this panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your insights. I think the audience and myself including, I very much enjoyed to see and hear those regional perspectives, how you are planning the not only the recovery, but really the long-term sustainability of the industry with the different characteristics that all of your regions have. So thank you for your insights. I think, as of me, I think I remember this comment made by Rafael on, it has to make business case. I think that's it has to be, make business sense. I think that's something that's definitely one of the ingredients. Interregional dialogue, Bill, you mentioned that. I think that's something that needs to continue as well. And of course, the costs of that transition into decarbonization will definitely be key in the coming years for the industry, for the national industries, like Suzanne mentioned earlier, but also for the global industry. So thank you again for joining today. Exciting discussion, and hopefully we'll see you soon in 2022 in person. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.